Thank you, Janice, and thank you everyone for attending the session today. Today we'll be talking about cloud payroll data migration concepts, and then with a case study in the United Kingdom. So if you are working on the global payroll and you want to see how things are working even outside the US, I'm sure 50–60% things are very close to what we do in US. But this one will give a perspective when you're doing a global implementation for the payroll project. Our presenter is Pratik Prasad. He's Oracle Ace. I think he recently got promoted to a higher level in Oracle Ace. So congratulations, Pratik. And he'll go over the presentation. So couple of things. If you are not talking or asking a question, please mute yourself. You can post the questions within the chat. If I can answer, I'll answer. Otherwise, we can wait until end of the session. So keep you can mute, keep yourself muted, and then feel free to ask the questions in the chat. And then we would like you to unmute yourself, and then you can ask the question at that time as well. Okay. With that being said, Pradeep, over to you.
Thanks, Gaurav. Thanks a lot, and welcome, guys. I'm going to discuss in the next 45 to 50 minutes the global payroll data migration concepts. This is specifically around UK case study, but it would probably help you even if you are from US or outside UK, really, because most of the objects are similar, although we will touch upon the UK specific data migration pieces as well. So I'll quickly go over the agenda. I will do the quick introduction as we just had, and then the basics of payroll. Payroll isn't very difficult in terms of really concepts, but then when it comes to the objects or data migration pieces in global payroll, there are specific requirements, and I will go over the setup elements. Then I will go over what is the employee data elements you can bring over from your legacy system or any outside payroll system you're currently running. Will show you a list of objects with the sample files, and then later on after this call you can actually reach out to me and I can probably give you the sample files if you require them. I'll also touch upon a little bit how you can actually automate the whole process and then build a tool in-house so that you can do data migration regularly using that. So just to start the conversation, my name is Pratik Prasad. I have 18 years of experience in enterprise applications. You come from a PeopleSoft background. I worked on PeopleSoft HCM and global payroll for about 14–15 years. And then I jumped into the Oracle cloud space. And I've been doing Oracle HCM and payroll for now 4.5 years, really. I've got some certification. I'm in a techno-functional background, so I do technical stuff as well as I do some functional stuff, or I would say I have knowledge of functional stuff. So I pretty much understand how you can do integrations and data migration in this space. I'm an Oracle Ace, so that's just a credential, just really, I can pass the credibility check on you guys from you guys. I've done product management on past several years, so I've built some products in the past as well. So that's why I'll be touch upon how you can make a tool. And then I'm also a very active member on Cloud Customer Connect. So if you have queries or anything related to any of this piece, you can actually reach out to me directly from Cloud Customer Connect or through LinkedIn. So let's quickly go back to the presentation. Why did I choose the subject? Well, I've been doing data migration and integration for, as I said, for about 18 years, and even in cloud space for 4.5–5 years. Whenever I reach into any project, what I found that people seem to understand the implementation itself, the task of implementation. But when you ask people, well, what do you need to do to migrate the data? They pretty much understand the basics of it, but nobody really had clear understanding of what objects do I need to bring, what will be the sample templates I need to really load the data, and it wastes a lot of time to actually go into the project and then reach to the level where you can start doing this data migration piece and reach to your SIT, UAT stage. Lots of effort gets wasted just to figure out what I need to migrate from legacy. So I thought, well, I have done it a few times now, but with a lot of hard work. I can actually come up with a list. So maybe it will be helpful for myself in future, just in documentation purposes, and it might help you guys as well. So let's jump in the basics of payroll now. maybe I would say probably 90 to 95% people up here probably are paid through a payroll, and maybe some of them are contractor. So we are really the end user of the payroll. So we probably seem to understand payroll really well in a way, because we all get paid salaries. We all understand what are your deduction on your pay slip. We all really seem to pay taxes, and then get our payments through the banks or whatever the wire system, Swift system you pay your employees to in different countries, different system, UK's banks. And we all contribute to pensions, really, most of us really. And then in a pay slip, sometime you understand the year-to-date details are there, how much you have earned in last 1 year, in this financial year, how much tax you have paid. So all these aspect of payroll in terms of basics, we really understand well. But just wanted to cover that so that we have an idea that payroll isn't hard really, because we are the user of payroll. We get paid and we really work to get paid. So there's one aspect nobody really wants to say that they don't understand, because everybody wants to know the fact around it. But when we come to actually doing this payroll through the Oracle Cloud, there are some things which are slightly different. This doesn't look as simple as it sounds here. And similarly, when it comes to data migration pieces, it's even harder in some aspects because of the design of Oracle Cloud Payroll and the word of calculation card, which scares everyone. So let's jumping into what are the data objects. Now, you might have seen the HDL object listing, the page which has the data objects on the one screen. There are about 395 objects as far as I know, and probably 50 to 60 are from payroll area itself. Well, we don't migrate all of them anyway. There are only specific requirements for specific countries or a specific implementation. But out of that list, what I figured out, this is probably the list people are generally most interested in an implementation. And these arrow is my presentation of how you should be loading things, the kind of sequence of elements or sequence of things, data objects of files you should be loading. Now, on top of I have got the setup elements, and bottom I have got the transactional elements or the employee data, the data migration piece. This piece I probably won't even consider a data migration piece, although HDL, HCM Data Loader, HDL supports most of this. And you can load the data, but you won't probably decide that you will load all of this using HDL. It depends upon you. But this data, which is the employee specific data, definitely a piece for HCM Data Loader or for proper data migration. This might be in spreadsheets or might be in some legacy system or the third party payroll provider currently you're using, and then you want the data coming out of their system and load into your system. To make the payroll work, you almost need all of this coming into your payroll, Oracle Cloud Payroll. And again, this is the sequence I generally follow. You can switch things back and forth a little bit, but there are requirements on things which I will talk later, which means some of things cannot be loaded before something else has been loaded. So we'll come to that as well. But these are the elements majorly will load. So payroll definitions. Payroll, monthly, weekly, bi-weekly kind of payrolls. Some organization might have 2 payrolls, some organization might 5, 10 maybe. I hardly think you will actually load that using loader. Elements, well, a good candidate, if on a larger implementation, you might even have like 500, 400 elements of allowances, nightly shift allowances, day shift allowances, or the parking fee or something like that, or membership fees, specific simple elements. Generally, it's a candidate that those smaller elements you can actually just migrate using HDL loader. Similarly, this is something now again the concept as a conceptually eligibility doesn't make any sense, but in an Oracle Cloud, an element cannot be given to a person unless you define elements eligibility, and that based on the eligibility people get that element. And most elements will probably be open eligibility, but even then you still have to define that eligibility. Similarly, balances, if you want to capture some year to date, quarter to date, month to date, lots of balance definition just for reporting purposes, or maybe down the line you need to report it to your statutory bodies. You will define those balances, and sometime you migrate those definitions as well using HDL. Similarly, banks and branches, not many people migrate them using HDL because there is a loader in financial side which directly uploads everything, banks and branches, but those are required because without that, you can't really actually assign the bank account to employees and then use them as a personal payment method. So they'll be loaded anyway. Similarly, costing can be defined in payroll at multiple level elements, positions, department at payroll level. And again, you might want to upload this detail using HDL. I have seen this is quite a good candidate. I have one of the example here showing how will you do the costing details. Similarly, in payroll, wherever the things are calculated, the element values are calculated based on rates or something like a lookup table. You can actually define user-defined tables. And if there are a large number of values in the system you want to key in, rather than key in, you will actually load into through HDL. I'll quickly go over that later on. But then almost all of these definitions you will load through the HDL loaders, and I'll go one by one and will tell you the dependencies, but you can actually note down the sequence. This is pretty much the sequence I would prefer for any implementation, where the balance would be the last thing to load. Let's go over quickly. Now you define elements on an elements screen, but these can be loaded using HDL. I've got a sample HDL file here. You can load the definition, and in the same file, the payroll element definition.dat, you can actually have a metadata line for eligibility. In this example, I'm just loading an open eligibility for this element. So if you want to really cover, let's say 200 elements where the eligibility is just defined open, you can quickly create this kind of HDL file, and the element will have elements and eligibility together. Without the eligibility, you won't be able to pay the employee. Similarly, I'm not covered other things because I don't load, but costing is one of the candidate I generally load. So if we look at the costing definition on position, generally a better candidate, you'll have to load this using two different files. First, you load the cost allocation, which tells the system that you are loading costing details on something. Here I'm saying the source type is actually position. So and then you say position code of that position. So that means now the system knows that on this position, you're going to load some costing details. That's first file. When it goes in, then you need to load cost allocation account v3, which tells you what the segments are on this position where you want to allocate the cost. And then you need to tell the source subtype, which is cost. Proportion, again, on the screen that you can see 50%, 75%, 25%. Just be aware that in this file, the proportion is actually just 1 or 0.5, as you would see. And then the sequence is just the number 1, 2, 3 if you have multiple accounts going in there. And then you can give all the segments where you want to allocate the cost. Just a quick tip that the proportion is not 100, it's actually 1 for 100%. And loading user-defined tables, very simple template to load it. You can load, you need to actually create the table. Then you need to say how many columns do you have. In this example, I've only got one column, but you can have multiple if you want. Then you need to define how many rows you have in that table. And the row itself, it doesn't take up a column. Your row is just a name of the row itself. And then against that row, you will need to actually load the value of the specific column which you defined previously. In this case, I will define a rate column. So my rate is against the row number 10 is this value, and row number 20 is this value. So later on, our functional expert would probably be referring to this table saying, okay, if the person is in group 1, the rate of maybe allowance is that, but if the person falls in group 2, the rate is here. So that's kind of table come in the system, and then will act as a lookup table. So user defined table is used like that, but this sample is working sample. You can take it, or you can ask me later on LinkedIn or somewhere. I can share the file with you. Now going into the transaction employee data. Now, as I was saying, this is actually a global payroll data migration piece. So most of the information is same, whether it's Indian payroll, whether it's UK payroll, Kuwait payroll, Middle East payroll, or but some pieces are specific to UK. So when we come to this piece here, they are really specific to UK based. You have the calculation card, but the US calculation cards like federal tax are different than the calculation card in UK, US, UK, different cards, but more or less the concept remain the same. Now, when we load the employee data, I would actually go in this same sequence as I'm showing here. Salary, I will load salary. Salary is very simple. It's employee's hourly rate or their monthly rate of salary. It's actually not a payroll definition. Technically, it comes in core HR, in compensation. And then assign payroll. One of the first definition in payroll data migration, you want to tell the system which payroll the employee falls in, whether he's monthly, whether he's quarterly, whether he's on a weekly payroll, and from what date he's on that payroll. So you assign that. Now that is quite important, because if you not assign the person to the payroll, you won't be able to actually assign any person payment method to him, because it will refer to whether that method is applicable to the payroll or not. You would have probably done that anyway, but if you directly try to load an HDL through person payment method, it will fail because it won't be able to connect whether this is a valid payment method for the payroll or not. So that sequence, that's why it's important. Similarly, you can't really assign a payment method unless you actually have attached an account to the employee. And then I would probably load the element entries. So people are getting some recurring elements like allowances and bonus, or some specific city allowances, parking allowance, some deduction which are going on a regular basis during data migration. I will load those elements against the employee. There are no pre-rack really, but that's the kind of sequence I follow. Now coming to the more complex definition to be loaded. The balance is the most complex really, in terms of, because it has multiple steps to load, and you will ideally load them at the end of the data migration pieces, all of the pieces. But before that, we load the calculation cards really. Now, when we in UK, specifically in UK, when we create employee, the system automatically creates a stack deduction card, which takes your pay and NI information for UK. Now, it also creates an automatic card for pension auto enrollment, which is a statutory requirement in UK that everybody should be evaluated for pension. So the system creates a card, and then later on the evaluation engine evaluates them. But because you're migrating employee from a legacy system, they must have been evaluated in the previous system for the pension. You still need to store that information, whether they were actually evaluated, and if they were evaluated, what was the result for that evaluation. And then based on what data you have for this employee in legacy system, if the person is actually paying the pension, you need to load the pension card. They might not be paying any pension. You don't need to. If they have some court orders against them, you still need to load that court order. Now, this is a similar concept, US and UK. Court orders are really common both sides. You can load the court order data. Student loan, again, yeah, in UK, you need to pay student loan if you took the loan when you were actually studying, and you can pay back to the HMRC this loan. If you were paying the student loan, you will have to load a calculation card for a student loan, which is very similar to court order, comes in the same category. You can load that. Similarly, if you had got benefits like car or medical insurance from your employer, you would have to load the BIK data, which you will eventually report back to HMRC. Once you've loaded all these calculation card and everything here, generally you load the balances, which are your YTD data, year-to-date data, which is required for correct calculation of payroll when the payroll runs for the first time from payroll engine. So covering the objects, you need to consider things like salary. What history do you want? Do you really want the most effective data information as of go live, or do you want to bring some more history? Think about it, because for some reporting purposes, maybe you want 2 years, 3 years, 5 years of history for people, or maybe you just want to take the latest most effective data record for salary. Your choice really. Similarly, elements, I would prefer that you just bring in the active elements, which are recurring elements, so that you only consider the elements which will be paid from now on when you go live. You don't really need to bring those elements which are stopped in the previous legacy system only. Now, for historical purpose, you might want to bring them, but for reporting. But as a good advice, I can tell you that the best practice is only bring the active definitions, and try to avoid the data which is not required for running the payroll really. Reporting data you can actually leave behind. Now calc card, again, do you really want to bring the history of changes? If the pay details were changed in the last 3, 4, 5 years, different tax codes were changing, do you really need them, or you just need the latest tax code as starting this financial year so that your payroll is correct? Now you don't really need that for correct calculation of the payroll from go live, but again, for historical purpose, if you want to, the card automatically will be created on a higher date, because when you hire the people, even through data migration through HDL, the calc card would be there in the system with a default tax code and NI code. You have to actually update this tax and NI code to the correct value as of this tax beginning of tax year, or wherever the NI change happened in this tax year. Similarly, you need the pension data coming, so pension auto enrollment data coming, and the pension data coming. Again, auto enrollment data, you need to bring everyone really, because it's a statutory requirement. So you need everybody's the automatic enrollment to the pension card in the system for reporting purposes, because it's a legislative requirement really. But the pension, whoever is really paying the pension, you want that. If somebody stopped in the past, you don't really need that, so you can stop that as well. Similarly, student loan, again, whoever is actually paying a student loan, I would suggest just to bring that information. Bank account and pay method, again, just consider if there are joint accounts, if there are two employees paying in the same bank account, the HDL would be slightly different, where you need to make the primary and secondary owners. So consider that as well. Again, if effective start date of pay methods really doesn't make much difference, but you can actually have this start date as a go live date, because you're not going to pay anybody retrospectively. So consider that. You don't really need any historical data here as well. Similarly, balances, you need to consider what balances you need in the system for correct calculation of the payroll, and if there are any historical requirements to bring any history data in balances. I will touch upon a little bit how you can bring the historical data for pay reporting purposes, as Oracle Cloud Payroll only needs some statutory balance to do the correct calculation from go live onwards, and everything else is just optional, and I would suggest to avoid it as far as you can. But if there are specific requirements, you can bring that, and the system would be able to calculate most things correctly afterwards. So just covering the files, salary.dat file is used to load the salary. All you supply is the salary basis name and date from where the salary started. Again, if you really wanted multiple salary records, you could have just given the different date from date to, and then it will have the historical information for the employee. My suggestion, not to bring everything you like. Again, assigned payroll, you want to tell the system when this employee went into this specific payroll. Here, like an example, this employee started on UK monthly payroll on this date. Now you can bring this, you can make this date as a go live date, because all you calculating is from here onwards. But consider that if you're bringing any historical balances, let's say you want 1 year or 2 year of history in payroll, a balance can never be loaded for a month if the person wasn't on that payroll for that month. So if you wanted that this person's balance information, I want, let's say, from 1st April 2020, the payroll assignment would have actually started on 1st April 2020. So keep that in mind. That's the only challenge. Otherwise, the balance won't load later on. External bank account, nothing really fancy here, but the system requires you to have the party record before you can actually assign the bank account to the person. So when you hired a person through HDL, a party record is not created automatically. You run a couple of the processes. So run the synchronized person record and maintain party and location record. The process through ESS, and the once that has run, a party record would have been created, and you would be able to assign that. Otherwise, you'll get an error, and eventually the error will tell you run the synchronized person record process. So this is a kind of a requirement that in Oracle HCM, even though it's an HCM system, you need a financial party record for the person if the person should be paid by Oracle Cloud. because eventually the data goes through Oracle Cloud Payments. The file is simple, external bank account.dat file. Actually, you create first account telling you what account number, an account name, and if they have in UK, they have the building society roll number that goes into secondary account reference. And you can put, it becomes an additional key if this person had that. And then you, in the next line, you can tell the system who is the owner of this bank account. If this was in a joint account, two people had it, same account, you can say primary flag is Y, and then there you can have another person telling that person number. It would be another person number, you can see primary flag N. And if one or two or three people can share the same account number. So that's just the HDL consideration. Then later you can load, but once you loaded the bank account, you can quickly come on to the loading the assigned payroll personal payment method. But the prereq, as you already know, assigned person should have been assigned to the payroll, and the payment method should have been created, which will be created by the functional consultant anyway. So now in this example, now we are telling the system for this person, use the same bank account information and call it a BACS payment. We have got a BACS payment set up as a source payment, and whole 100% of this, whether you can divide, you can actually distribute the amount within percentage, or you can say one account pass £500 and other accounts pass everything else in the salary. So you can use multiple accounts in the system as well for the employee for data migration purposes. If you were already doing it in this example, I'm taking, well, all 100% will go into this account for the employee. Again, very, very simple HDL file, but this seems to give us lot of problem. I have seen many problems, and this is one of the scenario I have seen many people ask me before. I get an error sometime, value of this access aren't valid for bank account ID, even though the bank account name and number are exactly same in payroll personal payment method file. What I figured out with time is, if you have in bank account encryption and masking enabled, sometime even after once you've loaded the bank account, when you load personal payment method is actually not able to refer back to the same account because it's been encrypted in the table. So even in the query, you see XXX against the bank account number, and that's the same probably happening with HDL. How do you resolve it? Go into manage system security options, task through setup and maintenance, and generally remove the masking, display masking during the data migration. Completely disable it, say I don't want to mask it, and then try to run the personal payment method file, and it will go through. I have seen 4 or 5 queries on Customer Connect recently on this, and they were all resolved using that. Coming to element entry, okay, again, the recurring elements from legacy system, if the employee was paying, given some allowances, or they were paying some deduction on regular basis, you would have to load them into Oracle Cloud. Very simple file, element entry.dat. You can tell the assignment number, name of the element, and effective start date. Hopefully it will be, you can actually take the go live date as the start date, or you can take actual real date, which if it was given from the legacy system, and hopefully this would be a recurring payment. So it will be going for maybe a specific date in future or end of time, whatever it is, you can have that in the file. You need to supply the data group name, and if this element was paid multiple times within the same period, you might have multiple entry count as well, which you can give here. Multiple entry count can be any big number if you like. Entry type is E always, which means element entry. Nothing really complex. You need to, on the second metadata, which is entry value, you need to tell the values. You will see what is the entry type value, whether it's input value name, whether it's amount, rate, or hourly rate, or whatever you're calling it. You have that, and then you have the X screen value, which is actually the amount or rate value which you would supply in the system. Not so complex. Now coming to the one of the most complex definitions, which is in a way a must requirement when you're going live with Oracle Cloud Payroll. This is a UK specific card I'm touching upon. The system will create an NI card, but you would have to actually update the NI card. So because you be just updating it, doesn't look that complex, because a calculation card for P and I statutory deduction card have multiple metadata lines, but all you need to touch is 2 of them really. And I'm going to refer back to this, the values only using user keys. So you don't really need to know source keys or any fancy values from the system. So what you can just say, what you need to update is the correct NI category, which sits at the card component detail on a statutory deduction of the component name of NI, and the context one value is called what's the category. It might be A, B, C, because there are not many categories. If you're above 21 up to 65 is A, whether you're actually past your retirement age, then it's become C. But whatever that change has happened recently, you might even have multiple lines going in here, because if maybe in this financial year we had multiple times NI changing, you can load that as well. With a different same line, you will copy over and then give new effective date and see what was the NI category. Not so complex here, but you also have to update the pay component details, which is the component sit on the component detail level. Now, this metadata line is quite complex, but the individual details aren't really. What I'm focusing on here, you will have to update the text code value, which will be the correct text code for this year. So that's why maybe the effective start date of this card would be in that text year, because that's when you probably got a P9 declaration from HMRC that this is his text code. So from that starting point, whatever the latest text code is, all you need to know that, so that the going forward, the calculation is correct. And one of the important bit is you will have to supply some of the field which are not even there on the screen. This is the requirement for HMRC purpose, and they can only be updated through HDL. So you must update previous HMRC payroll ID field, so that when we run an FPS submission through payroll, HMRC knows that this is the previous payroll ID for this person, as the Oracle Cloud is going to give the new HMRC payroll ID to the person, and they should be able to link it back. So you will also need to save employment filed, which is Y, which means employment has been already been filed from previous system. All you're doing is continuing the conversation with HMRC with the same account, the payroll ID really, which is changing. So they will able to update it, but you should update these details. Now, if somehow the statutory deduction card wasn't there, maybe you deleted it, it's allowed in the system that you can delete the statutory deduction, which is by default there in the system. Then you actually have to create from scratch, and creation is slightly more complex, because you will have to create the calculation card, the components. Now, PAE and I components are complex, because you will still have to create something called aggregation information between, which is the father of NI component. And then you have to create component details, and then you'll have to actually associate those components with your assignment. So a little bit more complex, but the HDL sample is there, and there is a white paper which tells you how to do it. And I had to do it in one of the implementation where all the cards were deleted for something. Now, you need to also create if some of the employee were paying student loans. So maybe in your implementation, out of maybe 10, 20,000, there are 200 or 300 people, or 10 or 1,000 people are paying student loans. You will have to create the student loan card for those guys who are paying it. It isn't really complex, because all you're telling the system is what is the plan type they are paying, 1 or 2 or 4 really. So just load the card from scratch. One thing to notice, that even though it's only a student loan calculation card, you still have to load a card component of court order information. Even though he has no court order against this person, but you still have to create a court order information card component in the system. Otherwise, the payroll won't process it. Just observed it when I created it without this, payroll didn't even pick it. And when you go into white paper, it specifically says that. So you can refer back to the white paper. Again, pension auto enrollment, the card gets created automatically, but as I was saying, you'll still have to actually update this card to tell the current situation on pension enrollment for the employee. And as a legislative requirement, again, the card is there. All you have to do is just update the component detail. You can refer back to the card saying, yeah, I'm updating pension automatic enrollment. Sequence number is 1 really, and I'm updating that card component definition pension auto enrollment sequence 1, and it all, because these are the user keys and the person won't have more than one, it will automatically identify the card and you can upload the details. So you just need to say, like, this person was, if he was eligible job holder, and then he was auto enrolled, but then later on he opted out, and then you need to give those dates when he was actually auto enrolled and when he is actually opted out, all this information, so that for reporting it's there. Because this person, let's say an example, is already opted out, you know that he's not paying pension, so you probably won't load any pension card for him. If this person was never evaluated, you probably will say not assessed for pension, and you don't have to probably give anything else. That means the system will go and assess it when you run this pension automatic enrollment assessment process, and then it automatically will create the updated data on this card, as well as it will create the pension benefit and pension calculation card, which will eventually be used for calculation of pension. Again, just like statutory deduction card, if this card somehow was deleted because it automatically gets created, you would have to create from scratch. I've given the example, how would you create from scratch? A little bit more complex, but not as complex as statutory deduction card. This is the example, again, taken from white paper, but this works because I've had to do it in one of my implementation where the cards weren't created to begin with. Now, benefit and pension, again, if the person was actually paying into pension scheme, so you had to load the payee card, but payee card just stores the information that he was actually evaluated, but whether he actually is paying into a pension scheme and whether the calculation engine will actually calculate, that comes from the pension benefit or benefit and pension card. Really, payee's pension automatic enrollment card only plays the role for assessment, not for the calculation of the payroll itself. So if an example, if someone pays into two schemes, so maybe he enrolled into a company pension scheme and then later on also decided that he want to voluntarily contribute to another scheme. Maybe the employer has another scheme. In this example, I have shown that, yeah, you will create one card called this one for benefit and pension, and then you will create card components. The components will have the detail for pension. So if he's paying into two pension scheme, you will create two card components, and you need to give the reference number against that, or employee's reference number again these policy. Again, this I have found as well. The system won't throw any error if you don't load context one, which is our reference number. But if you don't have a reference number, somehow payroll won't even pick it up. So these references are useful. So let's say this person was just this number. I have actually loaded whether A and B, and maybe if we were contributing 3, maybe A, B, and C. But that was useful to know later on. Now you need to also create an association of this card against the person. I'll have to create that, and then you need to load the association detail that this person assignment is attached against this association or these card components, so that system knows that this ties back everything together when it's doing the calculation. Again, you need to say what are the value definition or percentage of contributions against policies. If a policy doesn't have any, you don't have to load any, because some policies really have a fixed percentage contribution. So all you need to do is just load the card component, not anything further than. But if you need to tell the values, then you can load value definitions. Like in the company pension, I need to load percentage of employee and employer contribution both, but the pension deduction only requires how much I am paying as a voluntary, that too is a flat amount. So I had to load this value, and then eventually you need to go one further level down to tell the system what values are these, so actual value of the percentage or the flat amounts. Again, the example, this is a working HDL. So you can take it, or you can ask me later on. Court order, again, I have not loaded recently, but there is a white paper. There are 12 different kind of court order. It's quite complex to create the different file templates. And in my recent project, there were only about 20, 30 court orders, and business just decided to key them in. But again, there are an example. I can refer back to the white paper, and you can take it from there. That's also not very difficult. And just like everything else, you can refer back to all the metadata lines using the source system keys, which generally works better when you're doing in the calculation cards, although you can load them without the source system keys. I have done that as well in my previous example. Again, benefit in kind calculation card. This generally business does more often than just the data migration, because these details of the car benefits or the fuel benefit or the medical insurance changes throughout the year as well, and system has the business has to take care of those. You can load them through HDLs, so the reference is there in the white paper, but I have actually created recently a HSDL and which worked fine. I have just noted down where I have put my blog heading here. I have actually shown all the step how you can make the BIK calculation card HSDL template, which will work through HSDL without any issue. Even though it's a calculation card, which is quite complex to make through HSDL, work through HSDL, but HSDL works just fine. All you need to know the relationship between parent and child and how you connect them. So it's slightly complex, but if you follow the blog, you'll be able to make it work as well. Now coming to the balances, let's say you have loaded everything else. Now the balance is the one final puzzle, but which is the most important puzzle, because if you don't load balances, or if you are not loaded correctly, your payroll mid-year go live is not going to be successful, because you won't get the correct calculation of tax and NIs. If you're going live at the beginning of the tax year, let's say you go live just in April in UK, you really don't need to load any balances and you would be fine, because the system would consider the first month is the pretty much first month of the tax year, and the tax and NI will start calculating from there on. But if you're actually going live, let's say in October, September, mid-year in UK, you need to load some balances. So there are some mandatory balances without which you will not be able to go live. Really, you need those balances, year-to-date values coming from your previous system. Other than that, there are other balances you might need for reporting purposes, just to keep the history sometime, or just keep the history within the year itself. But that's purely for reporting purposes, might not affect any calculation. So refer back to this doc ID in on support.oracle.com. That tells you how you should load the balances, and also has a list of balances you should be considering for go live, and with the mandatory values you must be loading. So this is the list of balances in UK you must load if you want to go live with Oracle Cloud Payroll. So you need to know the payee, which is the tax you paid through this year, any tax year, tax bill pay, NI bill pay you had, and then you had the breakdown of this pay into different NI components. The payroll guys understand that bill must come from the source system, and you should load these balances. Not all of them will have value. It depends on the threshold of the values and amount paid into different categories. Some would be zero, but some would be non-zero, but you should be considering loading that. Dimension, I suppose you understand, it's just telling the system for what period and for what key combination this value belongs to, whether it belongs to his entire the enterprise relationship, or whether it's only for that assignment, only for a specific deduction card or insurance type or pension type. The keys play a role how you're slicing the information. That later on will be used when the payroll does the calculation. Now, just to give an example, most balances are not that difficult to load, because their dimension only requires the basic information, but NI requires some specific information, specifically coming out from the statutory deduction calc card. So when you load the NI balances, they not only require the fields like payroll relationship number, term number, assignment number, and what payroll that belongs to, but it also requires aggregation information, NI category, pension basis, NI reporting, HMRC payroll ID, and these go in the fields in the balance line HDL as a context values because there is no specific field for them. But not only you need to tell the context name, you need to have the context value, and this value you need to fetch from the system, back from the system, because you have already loaded all other definition. I found this SQL quite handy, and it is there in my Oracle support. The Oracle guys gave us that if you need the aggregation information for an employee or the NI reporting HMRC payroll ID value for loading the balances, you can run this SQL. SQL is there. Again, I can share with you guys if you require, and I can probably post it in my blog later on. I have made the BI report for that as well, and I can probably post in the sharing center later. Again, loading balances, not a difficult task. All you have to do is load a batch header, which tells the system, I'm going to load balances, a batch name as this, nothing more than that. And then I load a line file, which has all the individual lines of balances and referring it to the same batch name. So here you will have dimensions and context values. You will notice most of the normal balances like gross pay, net pay, they don't require any specific additional context values, so we can leave them. But some of the complex ones like NI employee, NI employer, they require more information. Then you'll actually have to pass the values like that. Context one, context one value, context two value, and then these values, as I was saying, will come back from the SQL. Now, you might have a requirement to load some monthly balances for a previous 12 months or 24 months. So just consider, as I was saying in my example, I had to actually do on one of my implementation load 24 months of balances. And one of the good thing about loading balances is even if you want to bring 24 months of balances or last year to date values, you don't actually have to load year to date. All you have to load is a specific balance period to date value, and system can automatically calculate all the quarter to date, Y to date, tax year to date, rolling 12 months, inception date, all the balance dimension related to the single balance, it will automatically will calculate. And when you go back after loading, you can check. But let's say in this example, I was loading my element list, a custom balance monthly value for March, April, May of last year. And for some months it's about 0. I will load it like that. It doesn't require any context really, but you need to make sure one thing at least, that the assigned payroll should start before this date, because that needs to cover the period, and as well as statutory deduction card should be there prior to that date, which would be there if you never deleted it, because the card automatically starts on the hiring date, because it gets created automatically. Once you load this data, system will automatically create the YTDs and rolling month, 12 months, or inception to date dimension if this balance had those automatically. You don't really load anything else. You just need to load the period to date dimension. Just a quick tip, if you want to load history for any salary or any elements, just load the PTD value for that element, and system will automatically have all the balances ready for that, and you can report on it. Although these are not required, only these ones, NI ones, and the list from the previous screen are the mandatory balances you should be loading for UK payroll. Once you loaded the HDL, the balances are slightly different. Once you load the HDL, that doesn't do anything. The data only goes into staging table, header and line. And in most cases, the balance file are huge, millions of lines generally. In my implementation of 20,000 guys, there were about 3.4 million lines we were loading, because we were loading so many custom balances too. And the HDL goes straight up as success. But that doesn't mean it's actually successful, because that is only loading the file data into the staging table, but will probably say success. Then you run an initial load initial balances payroll flow. That payroll flow itself is like running a payroll that takes the data and then it actually distributes to different period correctly and then initialize those balances. So all the YTD values, whatever the upload date you used, so maybe you're going live in September, you will probably say, okay, end of August, that's NI was this. All the YTD values automatically will be initialized as of the first day of that year, which will be 6th April of this year. They will be initialized on that date. All the month to date values will be initialized whenever you put the upload date on my previous screen. So the upload date I'm using here, this is the date. So the metadata lines has one thing called upload date. That date decides where it's going. So if I've used this March, that means this belongs to March period, and this balance will actually, even though I'm saying 31st of March, it will go as a 1st of March because my period is started in 1st of March. If it was a weekly payroll, I probably used some date within the week.
Pratik,
Once I'm
hey, sorry to interrupt, Pratik. Just want to do a time check. We have around 7 minutes left. I'm not sure.
yeah, I'm reaching the end.
All right, just wanted to do time. Thank you.
Yeah, that's the last definition we're looking at, and then we'll come to question within a couple of minutes, really. Yeah. So once you've loaded the payroll, run the payroll balance flow process, all you want to look at this kind of success. But if a couple of employees failed, it will say critical errors. Although it doesn't mean that all the balances have failed, some of the employees have failed. But the good thing or the bad thing about the balances process is that you'll have to actually roll back the whole process if you want to reload the whole file once again. And one of the key thing to remember when you want to initialize balances, you can only initialize balance for an employee once. So if you have initialized 10 balances now and you want to come back a month later, say, oh, I should have initialized 10 more balances, that doesn't happen. You can never initialize any balances any further. You can only adjust balances. So that's one thing to remember. While you're loading the balances on the screen, if you found a critical error and if it says 100 lines failed, maybe you don't know what employees failed and what were the errors, you can use one of the SQL like that. Again, can share it later. You can reach out to me. You can quickly run this SQL and that can even you can distinct payroll number, because what I have seen, even though you're seeing hundreds of errors, they generally belong to only one or two people. And there are generally not many big issues with the data. Generally is to do with either the duplicate lines have come in the balances. System won't be able to initialize the same balances twice in a period, whatever, or if the statutory deduction card isn't there in the system for the person. That's pretty much generally happens, or the balance date is prior to the statutory deduction card being started. That will fail. Other than that, balances don't generally fail for any simple reason. There might be a name wrong, or name of the balance is wrong, or dimension wrong, name of the dimension wrong. But other than that, the system doesn't do any validation of the data itself. It doesn't cross-check whether you said salary was 4,000, but you're telling me he paid 5,000 in a month. System won't check it. It will just load initialize. So values has to be correct, whatever you're supplying. Again, once balance is loaded, you can come back to the balance result screen. You can look at the balances, and even if you were only loading period to date, the other balances will be initialized as well. So in the period, if I were initialized 12 month, I'm looking at specific month. I know the period to date is 0, but the tax year to date, it has got a value because I've loaded in a previous month some value. You can verify these details from there. Again, think automation, you can build something to do all the transformation and the mapping. We guys, or my offshore guys, have built something in Visual Builder Cloud using OIC, which does all of that, including the loading of HDL. We have a simple tool to do that. Just food for thought, look at some tool, because transforming the data into HDL format, especially for calculation card, isn't really a joke. It's not simple. It takes a lot of hard work to get it right and get those relationship of source system keys sorted. Just like that, we have something. Again, reconciliation system isn't really rich in terms of reconciliation report Oracle Cloud, but there are some subject areas I found useful. Some of them even functional were not aware, but I was able to actually find the information, like payroll calculation card real time It's a bit complex to get the data out, especially for UK calculation cards, because the calculation card subject area itself probably have thousands of fields, because it's same subject area. You can report on pension or tax NI or BIK, and different fields are used for different purposes. Creating a report will be a nightmare, but I have been able to successfully get the data out. Similarly, you can have element entry subject area, you have payroll balance real-time subject area, where you should be able to get some information out. Other than that, you might have to create some BI publisher report for reconciliation of payroll data. Some references, you later on, you probably able to refer to these ones, but these are really, really gold mines. Some of the white papers are really, really useful. Loading calculation card, really a requirement. If you're loading calculation card in data migration, you must read this, and you must read the balance initialization white paper if you're doing data migration in Oracle Cloud for UK or any other country, I'm sure. Hopefully, if that was useful. So any question you can fire away right now, or you can write in a chat or come back to me later on. Thanks a lot, guys. Gaurav, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Prateek. This is very helpful. Thank you for presenting. We do have one. I have a few questions, but I'm going to go with we have another question from one of the attendees. Could you please explain how testing with HRMC is done during testing phase after the balances are loaded?
Okay, so that is a FPS submission you're talking about. What you can hear me, right? Sorry.
Yep,
Yeah,
we can hear.
yeah. So HMRC also has got a test connection, and you as an organization should have a test connection. And once you made the connection, my functional guys have done that before. They actually send the data out. Most cases it fails only because if your data is dummy data, is going to fail. They might not have information against the people, but that's how the connection works, as I've seen in the past. Payroll run, you generally do that testing, definitely.
We have 1 minute left. If anybody has any question, you can either put it on chat or send it us on the, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question. Okay.
You can directly reach to me through LinkedIn, through Customer Connect, if you have any doubts. I mean, I'm always there. This session is all for you guys so that more people understand this.
Okay. Again, thank you very much, Prateek. Very helpful session. And attendees, hopefully you guys also got some value in the session. Like any questions, reach out to Prateek, send it to info@ohug.org, or you can reach out to me also, LinkedIn. I don't have email here, but some of you might already know my email address. So feel free to reach out to us. Thank you once again, Prateek.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining.